question of whether it was legal under international law is not for the British government or the American government to reach a conclusion. It's for the courts of law themselves, the International Court. The reality, of course, is that there are many countries, both in the West and in Asia and in Africa and elsewhere, who do occasionally find themselves in breach of what the courts decide, but we don't know what their decision will be. The Americans are saying it was in accordance with American law, and that is a matter which will be tested by the American courts, who are independent of the Trump administration. So they'll come to their decision whether they were correct in saying American law justified what they did.
Nicolás Maduro has described himself as a prisoner of war and said he is innocent of charges of narco-terrorism during his appearance in a New York federal court. There were no cameras in the court, but the transcript reveals that Maduro told the judge in Spanish, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the new leader, Delcy Rodriguez, has been sworn in as the interim president at the National Assembly in Caracas.
From all political sectors of Venezuela, from all social and economic sectors, let us swear together as one nation to move Venezuela forward.
Well, at the United Nations, there's been condemnation of the US military operation to seize him as a breach of international law. In the Commons this evening, the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said she did raise the issue when she spoke to her US counterpart.
In my discussions with Secretary Rubio, I raised the importance of complying with international law, and we will continue to urge all partners to do so at every stage. It is, of course, for the US to set out the legal basis for their actions, and the UN Security Council is discussing Venezuela this afternoon. These issues will continue to be matters for international discussion.
Well, she did not say whether or not the British government believes the US action is lawful. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, criticised the government for failing to stand up to the US president.
Does the Foreign Secretary not realise how ridiculous it looks to refuse to call this what it is, a clear breach of international law? Yeah. Will she at least publish all the advice the government has received on the legality of Trump's actions?
Well, President Trump has told reporters the US needs Greenland for its national security. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has dismissed the claim as a fantasy and warned President Trump against attacking a NATO country. Keir Starmer said he stands with Denmark.
Let me be really clear about Greenland. The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is a close European ally, a close NATO ally, and the future, therefore, has to be for Greenland, for the Kingdom of Denmark, and only for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And we're absolutely clear about that.
Well, I'm joined now by Sir Malcom Rifkind, former Foreign Secretary. Good evening to you, Sir Malcolm.
Good evening.
Well, it's clearly a very difficult position for the British government, but do you think they're right to essentially sit on the fence on this question of whether or not that US operation was legal under international law?
Well, the question of whether it was legal under international law is not for the British government or the American government to reach a conclusion. It's for the courts of law themselves, the International Court. The reality, of course, is that there are many countries, both in the West and in Asia and in Africa and elsewhere, who do occasionally find themselves in breach of what the courts decide, but we don't know what their decision will be. The Americans are saying it was in accordance with American law, and that is a matter which will be tested by the American courts, who are independent of the Trump administration. So they'll come to their decision whether they were correct in saying American law justified what they did.
Yeah, because clearly there is the question of the legal case against Nicolás Maduro. That was opened in New York today, and that will be tested in the US court. But there is this wider question, isn't there, of whether that US operation to remove the head of state of another country, or the person who claims to be the head of state, whether that is legitimate. I mean, when you look at the fact that Nicolás Maduro was deemed to have stolen that election in Venezuela, when you look at the repression of his people, the fact that he wrecked the economy, do you think that perhaps on this occasion, given those circumstances, Britain is right not to criticise what President Trump has ordered?
Well, my own view, and I can only give a personal view, I'm not in government, but I believe that the judgment that the world will ultimately come to will, to a very large degree, not depend on fine legal distinctions, but on whether the political judgment of Trump and what he's doing and what he intends to do over the next few days and weeks, whether it will achieve beneficial results for the people of Venezuela. See, the question is, the fundamental question is that we know that from the point of view of the international community, most countries, not all, Nicolas Maduro was not a legitimate president. He stole an election against the wishes of 80% of the Venezuelan people, and therefore to talk about this in terms of legitimacy begs the question, well, what is the legitimacy of Maduro in the first place?
So under those circumstances, I accept that you're giving your personal position, but as somebody who served at the Foreign Office, you'll know this dilemma that the government faces, not wanting to offend or damage the relationship with President Trump, whilst at the same time being aware that many of your own MPs on all sides of the House think you should be far more robust in saying that you can't just go into another country because you don't like what their leader's doing.
I hear what you're saying, and it's a perfectly legitimate point that you're raising, but it's not what I see as the primary issue here. I think the primary issue is what is the purpose of the American government in carrying out this exercise. If it is to insist, because they're saying they are going to impose decisions on the Venezuelan government and on the new interim president. Well, if the most important decision would be, are you going to commit yourself to a genuine, internationally inspected, free election to choose the next president of Venezuela? If the Venezuelan government concede that, and if indeed we have a genuine free election to choose the next president of Venezuela, then I think the historic judgment will be that the American action was entirely justified. If, on the other hand, Mr. Trump is only concerned with benefiting American oil industry and oil companies, which is what he's saying at the moment, for various reasons I can speculate about, then that would not be a very impressive justification.
And indeed, you know, President Trump has talked about how he thinks that the US also needs Greenland. He's talked about other countries too. I mean, the US State Department has summarized the White House worldview, posting a picture of President Trump with the caption, "This is our hemisphere," talking, of course, about Latin America.
Yeah, you're quite right. And if you're wanting me to comment on Greenland, I mean, the situation is very, very simple and straightforward. Apart from Trump's reckless behavior, which we've seen on so many occasions, if he actually implies that having interfered directly by military means in Venezuela, that he could do the same in Greenland, the consequences would be quite dramatic and harmful, not just to Greenland and Denmark, but to the relationship between Western Europe and the United States, because he would face not the mild criticism or any ambivalence. He would face fierce condemnation from every Western European country, including the United Kingdom and France and Germany and Italy, and I could go through a whole range of others. And it wouldn't be rhetoric. It would be deep, deep anger at what he was doing. Now, I don't think he's going to do that. I think he realizes that would be foolish and stupid. What he has said is that his primary concern is that in the modern world we live in, Greenland is much more important to international security and American security because of its geographical position and because of potential aggression, particularly from Russia. Well, the Danish government have already said they have not the slightest problem about working with the United States so that any measures the United States wants to take to protect Greenland and international waters from Russia or another potential aggressor, Denmark will work with them to achieve that. So you don't need to occupy a territory. America at the moment has treaties with Japan in relation to what happens in the Far East. The whole point about NATO is it's a treaty organization. It's not one Western country invading another. So it would be utterly intolerable. And I can't believe that even Donald Trump would seriously contemplate that.
Well, and of course, as you mentioned there, Denmark is a NATO country, supposedly a NATO ally with the United States.
Well, not supposedly, actually. Nobody doubts that. Even the Americans don't question that.
Well, the point I was questioning is whether it was an ally, since he's been talking about seizing a bit of Denmark's territory.
We mustn't be premature. There's no doubt that Trump would love to acquire Greenland. Some of his American predecessors created precedents he loves to wish to follow. For example, the Louisiana Purchase, or Florida, or Alaska, were all acquired in the 19th century from either European countries or the like. So he wants to be able to do the same so that it'll mark him down in history. But that's just typical Trump. Irrelevant priorities that he should not allow to influence his judgment.
He has, though, also talked about Cuba, about Colombia, about whether he's certainly hinted at further operations there. Do you think that what we're seeing here is President Trump essentially ripping up what has been described as the world order, what we thought was the new world order since the Second World War?
Well, I think we've got to be careful here, because you've got to always distinguish Trump rhetoric from what actually happens. Not that nothing happens, things do happen, but not necessarily in the same way. One of the basis on which Trump won the last election was he said we're going to have no more invasions of other countries in order to have regime change, as happened in Iraq and it was attempted in Afghanistan with American troops in those countries. Now, I think he means that, and I think he's also conscious that what he's done in the last 24 hours may look like a breach of that promise, because he is, in one sense, appearing to try to deliver regime change. Now, he's not occupied Venezuela. He's not sent any troops into Venezuela. And of course, you don't occupy a country unless you let your military take access to it and get control of the territory. And I don't think that is likely to happen. But what worries him is that some of his own supporters, the so-called MAGA movement, will heavily criticize him if he seems to be going back to the policy of George B. Bush, invading Iraq and policies of that kind. So I come back to the point I said earlier. I think it's a crucial point. When he has contact with the president, the so-called new interim president of Venezuela, what is remarkable is that, having got her anger off her chest yesterday, she then, in the second public statement she made, and she said it very publicly, was she wanted to work with the United States in order to reach agreements that would prevent the need for further violence. Now, if she means that, then what Trump should be saying privately, if not publicly, is that the most important consideration is there needs to be a new president of Venezuela, acceptable to the people of Venezuela. Are you going to allow a free election, a proper free election, not a bogus one properly supervised by international observers, and that must happen in weeks or months, but certainly not years.
We'll have to leave it there, Sir Malcom Rifkind. We are out of time, but it's been great to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.